1st of April, 2019. Taiwan urges Australia, U.S., and Japan to unite to push back against Chinese in the Pacific. Taiwan's president has urged Australia, the United States, and Japan to join with her country in a values-based partnership to push back against growing Chinese influence in the Pacific. 6 of Taipei's remaining allies lie in the Pacific, and Beijing has been intent on poaching them as it intensifies efforts to isolate Taiwan, which it sees as a mutinous province. Mutinous. Those are fighting words, and you don't see the Chinese use those words too often. President Tsai Ing-wen issued her call on the last day of Pacific trip designed to shore up its relations with 3 of those nations, Palau, Nauru, and Marshall Islands. I don't think I said those right. China has been ramping up investment in its Pacific allies, but Ms. Tsai, in regards to Taiwan, accused Beijing of undermining stability and good governance in the region. This is why I think it's essential for Taiwan and like-minded countries to work through and create a values-based partnership in the Pacific, she said. I believe that when given a choice, Pacific states would prefer assistance and investments come from countries which share their values and interests. Okay, Taiwan's president said nations like Australia, the United States, and Japan could better coordinate their efforts on aid and infrastructure to ensure that they could maximize their influence. All right, so they're asking for a handout. All 3 countries share unease about Chinese rise in the region. They have promised to ramp up investment in infrastructure through the Pacific response. Okay, I think I've seen not too long ago we sold them F-16s. Yep. China warns on F-16 sales. Extremely dangerous. China warns U.S. on F-16 sales to Taiwan. Dated the 31st of March, 2019. The U.S. hasn't sold advanced fighter jets to Taiwan since 1992. That's an interesting year for earthquakes. Primarily because it has, I think that's the last year we did a nuclear test. I'll have to check. But primarily because it has been wary of antagonizing China. In the eyes of Beijing, of course, Taiwan, despite its democratic elections and self-governing status, is part of China. Earlier this month, however, Trump administration gave its TAC approval, paywall, to Taiwan's request to purchase 60 F-16V fighter jets. That's a lot for a little country. A formal request will still need U.S. congressional approval, but the news has hardly rattled Beijing. Already. It's already rattled. Well, they're already rattled. Everything's rattled. Addressing the issue on Thursday, March 28th, Defense Ministry spokesman Wu Kui-an said that China resolutely opposes such sales to Taiwan and that any words or actions that undermine one China policy are extremely dangerous. On the same day, Foreign Ministry spokesman Geng Shuang said at a briefing, I will reiterate our consistent, unequivocal, and firm opposition to U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. China has lodged stern representations to the U.S. on this issue. We urge the U.S. to fully realize the high degree of sensitivity and severe impact of this issue, honor its commitment to the One China principle, and stop arms sales to the military ties with Taiwan. Before answering the question, he took issue with how a reporter described Taiwan president's first. I need to correct you on the title of the Taiwan's president. She is the leader of the Taiwan region. the so-called title of president is never recognized by China. Oh, boy, we got a revolution going on. I think that was kind of how we kicked off our home independence. No one cared, no one recognized. But look at us. Of course, we weren't connected to the British hip of their monarchy. The jets, in reality, wouldn't do much to change the power equation across Taiwan Strait, nor will it eliminate the threat that China poses to forcibly absorb a democratic Taiwan. Okay, so it doesn't do nothing. It's just threatening. Let's see, there's a couple other things here. Reckless incursion by 2 fighter jets. Oh, okay, so we're going to kick it off a little bit, heat it up. Of course, they're going to do this. Taiwan blasts China for reckless and provocative fighter jet incursion. So-called median line in the Taiwan Strait, a widely agreed upon boundary. Okay, so they have a boundary, but they're part of China. But they have no president. But Taiwanese believe they have a president. And look at that face. She's not happy. You don't want to come home to that. You guys remember that when you were kids? Man. All right. Real quick here. Yesterday I read how Japan's getting ready for the next big one. They're already evacuating certain areas they see as vulnerable to tsunamis. They're expecting a 30-meter tsunami this next one, which is 60 feet high. All right. And let's see what the Americans are doing over here. They got to be doing something. Major Pacific exercise preps Marine sailors for large-scale maritime battle. Okay, this is an article from the 31st of March, 2019, military.com. Thousands of Marines and sailors wrap up huge exercise in part to test their ability to get the right people and equipment out to sea for a potential large-scale maritime battle. 10,000 sailors and Marines completed Exercise Pacific Blitz in California this week. The members of 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, that's MEF, and several ships from the Navy's 3rd Fleet carried out the exercise, which prepared them for a battle that looked a lot different than those they fought in Iraq and Afghanistan in 2001. After years of flying into the Middle East and getting gear from big stockpiles there, prepping to operate in a distributed maritime environment is a lot different, said Lieutenant Colonel Ray Howard, 1st MEF Strategic Mobility Officer. And that's somebody's officer. I wonder if they're proud about that. See what the Army's doing. Thousands more soldiers will deploy to the Pacific to increase Army footprint. In a move to bolster U.S. troop presence in the Pacific, the Army has plans to deploy thousands of soldiers to the region for ongoing rotations. The new deployment could include as many as 5,000 to 10,000 troops, the equivalent of a division headquarters and several brigades. General Robert Brown, commander of Army forces in the Pacific, Stars and Stripes in the media roundtable interview this week. This is an article coming out of thousands more soldiers will deploy to Pacific to increase Army footprint. This was published on March 20th from Army Times, your Army. We are talking about moving troops into place with certain capabilities based on the partners we're dealing with. Move them out and move them back, he told Stripes, and then have the agility to move around the globe and in this theater the way we need to in response to our partners. All right, so this is not bad. You need to keep soldiers moving. This must be the active military. Let's see. 2018, the Indiana Army National Guard 76th Infantry Brigade combat team was the first Guard unit to lead a pathways exercise, spending 3 months from July through September, but with most soldiers spending 2 to 3 week deployments in the theater due to guard status. Right. The new version of Pathways has units staying in one country for longer stretches, such as this summer, when soldiers will spend 4 months in the Philippines doing training, Brown said. That will extend to 6 months rotation next year, he added. The multi-domain task force conducted its first series of real-world experiments focused mostly on targeting, firing, and communications across multiple services this past summer in the Pacific. The program will move to Europe this year for its second on-the-ground testing phase, he said. All right, what's the Chinese doing in the response? This is actually March 29, 2019. Chinese, and this is out of Business Insider, Chinese missiles could dust the U.S. military in minutes. Here's what would happen if they tried. Well, I hope there's a response. The analysis. China's massive missile forces could savage U.S. air and naval forces in the Pacific, lighting up ports and airfields and blowing up F-35s and F-22s and possibly aircraft carriers before they could respond. War gaming experts point to this as a persistent problem with U.S. forces in the Pacific, but it's far from a clear-cut win for China. Hey, make that a video game. Let the kids run that in the scenarios a couple hundred times. Don't tell them that it's a real threat, and process the data. I mean, I'd buy the game. The U.S. has a number of ways it can predict, prevent, or blunt a missile attack. Oh, I forgot. They got quantum computers. They don't need kids to play games anymore. And once the U.S. military and its allies kick into gear, China will face a mighty wrath. Experts at the cutting edge of simulated warfare have spoken. China would handily defeat the U.S. military in the Pacific with quick bursts of missile fired at air bases. The exact phasing was that the U.S. was getting its butt handed to it in those simulations. Breaking Defense reported the RAND analyst, David, so they're analysts, Ochmenek, as saying in earlier March. Now, I wonder if they're using quantum computers for their formula as well. I'm sure they could run that through. See, we got to be watchful for this because the computers are telling we're going to win, kind of, and then we're going to lose first. But they're also telling us who to vote for. So we got to wake up to this. I mean, it's not a bad situation that we can learn about these things on such a dynamic scale and try to adapt. But we're voting for a computer. And that's not in the story. I'm saying this. This is my opinion. Okay, I'm going to carry on here. In quotations. In every case I know of, Robert Work, a former Deputy Secretary of Defense, said, the F-35 rules the sky when it's in the sky, but it's killed on the ground in large numbers. That's a new Chinese parable, I guess. There's this, it's an American that said that. Against China, which has emerged as the U.S. most formidable rival, this problem becomes more acute. China's vast mountainous territory gives it millions of square miles in which to hide its extensive fleet of mobile, long, medium, and short-range missiles. In the opening minutes of the battle, the U.S. Beijing could unleash a barrage of missiles that would nail U.S. forces in Guam, Japan, Philippines, South Korea, and possibly Australia. With China's growing anti-ship capability, even U.S. aircraft carriers in the region would likely come under intense fire. For the U.S., this would be the feared attack in which the F-35s and F-22s, fifth-generation aircraft, and envy of the world, are blown apart in their hangars. Runways are cratered, and ships are sunk in ports. The remaining U.S. forces in this case would be insufficient to back down China's air defense and sea forces, which could then easily scoop up a prize such as, Taiwan. Okay, so Taiwan's not independent though, but depending who you're who you're asking, they are. Let's see. Additionally, the U.S. can't counter many of China's most relevant missile systems because of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty it signed with Russia, which prohibits missiles with ranges between 310 miles and 3,400 miles, the type it would need to hold Chinese targets at equal risk. The U.S. is withdrawing from that treaty, so given China's clear advantage in missile forces and the great incentive to knock out the best military with a sucker punch, why doesn't it try? China could light up much of the Pacific with a blistering salvo of missiles and a great harm to U.S. ships and planes, but they likely won't because it would start World War III. China would just be attacking the U.S. It would be attacking Japan and South Korea at minimum. Whatever advantage China gained by kicking off a fight this way would have to balance against a combined response from the U.S. and its allies. The U.S. is aware of the sucker punch problem in the event of the tensions rise enough that a strike is likely. Okay, the U.S. would simply spread its forces out among its bases and harden important structures such as hangars so they could absorb more punishment from the missiles. All right, this is if there's a telegraph. That means that they're going to either do this now or they're going to be vulnerable. So, I mean, we can't carry on fake scenarios. Potential targets China needed to strike would multiply, and the deployment of electronic and physical decoy would further complicate things for Beijing. For U.S. ships at sea, the use of electronic decoys and onboard missile defense systems would demand China throw tremendous numbers of missiles at the platform, increasing the cost of such a strike. Key U.S. military bases will also have ballistic missile defenses, which could blunt the attack somewhat. The U.S. also monitors the skies for ballistic missiles, which would give it some warning time. Alert units could scramble. All right, so if all things fail, that was the scenario they were talking about earlier. If all things don't fail, then China would just raise some hell. And it would be bad. I talked about, and I tried to talk about earlier, how California is on a fault line. And that fault line has a plate that goes underneath it. I think it's called the Fair-Allen plate. I put into question whether or not the right amount of explosive force could cause some sort of hydraulic effect. And even if it didn't, that there's a lot of tension in that plate. I kind of wonder if some of these earthquakes that haven't happened in the past weren't a result of testing we did between 58 and 92. We've seen a lot of earthquakes happening then. I'll let you track them. Maybe later I'll try to do some comparison. But they're going to go on and talk about how Japan's increasing their F-35s. They're going to have 100 of them. So we don't want this to happen. This is not the scenario we want, but that's what's going on in the Pacific. Thanks for joining me on The Curve.